you're not to blame for the conditioning you got and the experience as a child, for the environment you happen to rock up into, the circumstances that happen to you, and the traumas that happen to be imprinted upon your psyche. You're not to blame for the reality that was given to you, the reality and the stories of life that were conditioned and imprinted upon your psyche. You're not to blame for those, okay? So that's the safety, and this hopefully gives some relief. When I've given this example before, but it's a fantastic one. I was working with a young mother who was getting herself in, terrible guilt dynamic with when she was struggling as a parent. And so she'd be in these situations where she'd become frustrated with her child, and then she'd overreact and she'd get angry, and then afterwards she'd feel incredibly guilty, and that would bring her down. So she'd then be in that vulnerable space where she wasn't able to parent at her best again, and the cycle repeats. So first of all, I wanted to give her the safety, and it's, look, let me explain. At these moments when you're frustrated as a parent and you're feeling like these enormous emotional triggers, what's happening here is that emotional trigger is connecting to frustration you were treated with as a child. So when you were in that situation and you were 2, 3 years old, couldn't express yourself, maybe didn't understand the world very well, and you're getting treated with impatience and frustration, it was traumatic and difficult, really hugely emotionally challenging for a young growing mind trying to understand the world, to be in that situation. But when you're in a similar situation as a parent, there's an emotional trigger, and that emotional trigger is connecting to that experience you had as a child. So you're not as such experiencing the frustration of this moment. You're experiencing the frustration you were treated with when you were 2, 3 years old. So, and that's, we can look at that and go, wow, that's a difficult thing to contend with. When you're confused, upset, and maybe you and your parent aren't understanding each other, and you maybe get treated in a way that's difficult, treated with impatience, maybe you're shouted at, maybe you're hit, who knows? But that's a traumatic experience. That can be a very deeply traumatic experience which imprints upon our psyche. So when we're in that situation as a parent, the emotional trigger is connecting to that. So we are then trying to parent through the psychology of us being challenged as a child, and that's why it ends up being so big, so huge, and difficult for us to hold, and we end up overreacting with our child and acting in a way we don't want to. So I say, right then, the frustration isn't all about that moment. It's actually, this is an echo from a trauma of yours, and it's unearthing this emotion from then, and then you're trying to parent through that, and it's impossible. You can't do it. It's just impossible. So stop. And that's the next step. It's like, okay, stop, because that's when we go into transmutation of that emotional trigger, and it's stopping and using some processes instead. But when we explain that blame dynamic and what it really is, you're not to blame because you didn't choose to have these experiences. Okay, that's the safety. That's the known, that's the order. But we need something to change as well. For that, we need the courage and the chaos. We need the unknown. And for that, it's about taking responsibility. So this is blame. You're not to blame for this, but you are responsible for doing something about it now, especially once you become aware. So I always apologize for doing that, but now you're responsible, and yes, it is your responsibility to step forward, change this emotional relationship you have with that situation, and create yourself into something different. So you're not just passing on the same thing. So hopefully what I would get during a coaching conversation like that is the right balance, and I can identify it within the response of the person in front of me, that there's enough safety here that means they can then take ownership. There's enough comfort that means they can then step into courage. And so that's the sweet spot we need to find for ourselves. That's the stretch. That's the line between chaos and order. And if we are finding that line for ourselves, if we are finding that stretch, that's when we really step into a quite exponential experience of development, transformation, and joy. Just enjoying life and experience ourselves our highest. Because like I say, this is when we come alive as human beings, when we're in the right balance, that right playful space between safety and courage, between known and the unknown, order and chaos.